Okay. Welcome everyone to the Super Story Podcast, Vidcast. We have another exciting show where we're going to be talking about Soapbox, which is kind of like in your stories, not just being cool, but important. How well does that play off? So I'd like to introduce you to everyone. We've got Houston Howard, as usual, Brad Lusher, and myself, Travis Carter, aka T-Rev. Let's jump in, guys. Let's talk about the backgrounds that we have behind us on the Zoomcast.
All right, Brad, do you want to get started?
Well, if we're talking about Soapbox and meaningful movies, I had to pick Fight Club, of course.
Great
and
film.
I love that the soap plays an integral role in the story.
Sure. No, you know what's interesting about Fight Club is I'm a professor, teach transmedia design, and I obviously reference a ton of movies, and one of my favorite case studies is the transmediation of Fight Club, where the sequel to Fight Club, Fight Club 2, was actually a comic book, not a movie. One, because primarily because the story that of Fight Club 2 is so completely insane that no one would make that a movie. But it's super interesting when I refer to Fight Club because recently there was this girl in my class that had never seen Fight Club, and I said, "Oh, how can you have not seen Fight Club?" She says, "Yeah, I don't watch old movies." And I was like, "Oh, like
wow, we're old."
Yeah,
so just read the book then.
Right. I mean, I don't feel like Fight Club's an old movie yet. And then another kid was like, "Yeah, I think I watched that with my grandma once." And I was like,
Wow.
"Whoa, like, wait a minute, I don't know." That just immediately
Grandma?
But it still feels like current when I watch it. It doesn't
100%.
feel old.
100% the stands up, right?
So someone said that the other day. We were like gathering as a family, and like someone was over, and I was like, "Oh, you haven't seen E.T.? We should watch it." And she was like, "I don't like watching old movies."
Yeah, right.
Oh yeah, that was the year I was born.
Yeah,
that's super old.
Yeah, I mean, it's really incredible. And, you know, and looking back on it, I mean, I guess Fight Club at this point is 20 years old.
21.
Yeah, so you know, I don't watch. I probably don't watch movies from like the year I was born either, right? Like, so I mean, I get it, but it was just, I don't know, it was just like smacked me in the face for a second.
What do you guys think the Soapbox, that message was for Fight Club? I just watched it the other day. I'm curious to know what, in a sentence or two.
Well, I think for me, I think the most interesting thing about it, I mean, I think there's a few different ones, but the thing that resonates with me most now, removed from it, is Tyler Durden's speech that he gives on capitalism and consumerism, and you know, it's you look up the video on YouTube, and when he gives that speech, at the time, like, I didn't get it because really this story is about you know, people just like working in a machine, right? And they're not living, and they're just almost drones in in this like work environment, sort of a colony. And you know, when he starts launching into like, all we do is we spend our days inching along the freeway in metal coffins, going to jobs we hate to make money to buy stuff we don't need. And like, it didn't resonate with me when I saw it, like in college or the end of high school, whenever that was. But now I 100% get it, as you know, as an adult, and
also as a male. It's like, if you think about previous periods in society before basic needs were always taken care of for you, especially in the first world. It's like, as a man, like, you went and you provided, and you like made sure that your family had what they need. Like, and so, and the main character is like struggling with himself. It's like the most thing that he's worried about is like going on catalogs and like ordering furniture for his apartment.
Sure.
You know, his masculinity is like, it's not even a valued thing, you know?
Sure. Yeah.
That's kind of, and so that's why that internal struggle for him is kind of manifested on the screen as he's becoming this other person that's like just acting instinctually. Whereas in reality, he's like this like reserved little guy just in a little apartment, you know?
And what I think one of the most powerful decisions they made with that film, and I don't know if this is like this in the book because I didn't read the book, but Edward Norton's character, the main character, doesn't have a name, and he's never named, and that I think is such a powerful statement.
Right.
We know Tyler Durden, which is Brad Pitt's character, he has a name. But Edward Norton, his character is never named, and that is just so metaphorical and
Right.
representative.
He's just lost in society at that
100%.
point. It's
He has
modern
no identity.
eggs.
Yeah, and so like what's super interesting now is Tyler Durden's message to everybody in that film was exactly. I know you're a Gary Vee fan, Trav, just like me. Like it's Gary Vee's message of like, why are we working in jobs we hate to buy stuff we don't need? Like figure out, like lock into some sort of passion and meaning in your life. Now, so I'm waiting for somebody to do like a deep fake version of that scene with Gary Vee's face rather than Brad Pitt's.
That would be nice.
That would be awesome. But now the difference is that Brad Pitt, he takes that and Tyler Durden, becomes a terrorist as a way to fight back, which obviously, is not the right message. But that central core message, I think, is still resonant about don't waste your life doing crap you hate. Like figure out how to lock into some sort of passion. So, and that film means more to me now than it did when I was 16 when I saw it. Right,
and that is why it's a perfect movie to watch with your grandmother. Perspective.
That's it. Right?
Come on.
That's it. 100%. So that was a good choice.
What's your background, Houston?
So this is actually a painting that is called The Last Stand of Boromir, and the reason I chose this is I was as a kid when I was reading The Lord of the Rings, I vividly remember being emotionally affected by the story of Boromir in Lord of the Rings, where he's part of the Fellowship, but then he gets corrupted by the ring and tries to take the ring from Frodo, and he kind of turns heel in wrestling parlance, right, and becomes the bad guy, and the hobbits are running from him, and you think that he's just turned evil, but then but when the hobbits get surrounded by orcs, Boromir sort of he comes to his wits and he jumps in and he saves them, and he fights off like 100 orcs, and there's this like the tremendous scene where he's just filled with arrows, like, but he's still fighting. If you watch the movie, it's a really powerful scene. And I remember as like a 13-year-old kid being emotionally affected by the sacrifice of Boromir and the redemption of Boromir. And I'm a sucker for a good redemption story. And, I always, the redemption story of Anakin Skywalker in Star Wars, when he takes the Emperor, throws him down in the hole, the redemption story, Kylo Ren now in the sequel trilogy, Boromir. I'm a sucker for that stuff. I think we're all, just as a human race, our DNA is wired to be drawn to redemption stories, because ultimately the story of the world is centered around the redemption story. Yeah. And whether it's the Passion of the Christ or whether it's Boromir, I don't know, that always hits me hard. That message of no matter how bad you are, no matter what mistakes you've made, there's always an opportunity to come back from that. And even and by doing that, even that means that you sacrifice yourself for other people. There's something powerful in that yeah. I remember having to like set the book down as a kid, and like, I don't cry. We all know that. Like, if you guys have come to terms with that. I'm not a crier, but I'm emotionally stunted in that way. But I was emotionally affected by this, where I did like sit it down and like not read anymore because like, wow, like that was pretty heavy. And so even it's not really the theme of the message of the entire book, just that sequence and that little sub story there of that character always affected me. I love this. I love that scene in the movie, how Peter Jackson dramatized that. It was super cool. So
I was going to make a joke about you crying about the University of Kentucky Wildcats, and then I realized you're wearing a Texas shirt.
Well, yeah,
I was like, wait a minute.
well, see, I don't even cry about the Wildcats. I just get depressed.
You
Or
get angry too.
or angry. Yeah, but I used to get angry. I don't get angry as much anymore. But yeah, I definitely get depressed. But yeah, I have my Longhorn shirt on today. So, but that doesn't mean I don't still love my cats. But it just means this was the first shirt I picked out of my closet because I don't like to think more than 3 seconds about what I'm
saying.
wearing.
I don't own a Dallas Cowboys shirt. I hate
Oh,
them.
well, it's because the Dallas Cowboys are the nemesis of the Redskins. You would never see me ever put on a Louisville shirt or Duke shirt or North Carolina shirt. Texas is just like a weird neighbor that exists, and I have zero animosity for the University of Texas. So I don't mind to promote UT up until the point that they become some sort of rival. Then I will wish for their demise every single day and never wear the shirt again. So what about you, Trav? What do you got?
Real quick question, Brad. Did you read books when you're 10, 11, 12, 13? Fantasy, anything?
A little bit. Yeah, it's just I was never a speed reader, so like I'd have a book for like a couple of months and go through it and then find something else after that.
I just marvel. I mean, I think about when I'm growing up in East Oakland, 10, 11, 12, you just, in the hood, you just don't pick up a book about Boardmere. My characters were like Nino Brown.
Right, sure.
Gangster movies. It's just funny. It kind of fascinates me that I'm talking. You're reading these 300-page books, and we have been friends. Then, would you have sparked my curiosity and love for the literature?
No, you probably would have made fun of me and and bullied me, Trav. That's probably what would have happened. That's I was always sort of an anomaly because I was I always played sports and I did all that, and so like out of the jocks. And I was always sort of like the nerdy jock, right? I would go and play sports, and I had a bunch of sports friends, and I would do all that stuff, and I would go to the parties and all that stuff. But I always, I played tabletop role playing games. I was a heavy reader, so I had like a nerd side and a jock side that I tried to equally balance. But what I found though is that's the sweet spot to get girls, right? Because like they're initially attracted to like the veneer of the jock, sporty side. But then when you can show some depth, that's really when you get some girlfriends.
You can be competitive in sports and then take that over and dominate in tabletop board games, right?
Right. I'm just saying, like there's a sweet spot there, but yeah, I was definitely.
Can you let the man talk about Martin Luther King, please?
Yes. Well, yeah. Well, I asked the question. It was a little side journey, and thinking of being an equal opportunity employer in Soapbox for story. I thought Martin Luther King would be the perfect personification of how, when you're creating a soapbox, when your story, when your creative stands for something bigger than yourself, that people can grab onto, that can enlighten people, others who think like you, it just galvanizes the troops. That word spreads. In his movement, it's pretty blatant. It's out there of equality, but he started a movement, white, black, that message. Stories were told. There was no social media, but he could get hundreds of thousands to gather in Washington, D.C. So you think about the power of putting Soapbox, leading with a soapbox or message, not just being cool, but being important. Can it work? Can it make a story sell more? And I say yes. And I say Martin Luther King, he's just one of many who led with Soapbox.
Sure.
What's your favorite Martin Luther King quote, Trev?
I need to. I do have my quotes. Man, why didn't I have one? Yes.
Just say I have a dream. That's it. Just say I have a dream, right?
My favorite is when he said, "Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that."
I like that one. Right. I wish more people would kind of rediscover Martin Luther King's messages for today. I think they're so relevant. But what I love, the story I love about Martin Luther King the most, one is Simon Sinek, who's author who wrote the book Start With Why. He had a really good point in that book. He said that Martin Luther King didn't try to motivate and inspire people with a 10 slide PowerPoint deck that had bullet points of like, this is our tactical way to achieve racial equality in the country. He didn't do that. He would have bored everybody. He would have lost him. He wouldn't have engaged him. And so he inspired people with the message, right? He inspired people with something that came from his heart. And that, I think, is what we're talking about with Soapbox. But an interesting story about that is when you hear the "I Have a Dream" speech, we really only remember about halfway through that speech until the very end. The first part of the speech, he didn't really engage the crowd very well. And he was talking about more policy and policy changes and things like this. But what was super interesting is he actually had a dream about what he saw about, his kids playing with white children and all that. He had this as a dream, and he was telling somebody this. And it's a woman that's actually up on stage with him, and he had told her this story before he started speaking. And once they this lady was reading the crowd and thought maybe he was losing people, she leans in and tells him, "Tell him about the dream, Martin. Tell him about the dream." And then he said, I had a dream today, right? And then kind of like it goes into it. Super interesting. Donsley Abernathy told me that story, sort of like that deep cut from the civil rights era. So
that's awesome.
Super cool, right? Super interesting.
Thanks for bringing that to light as the white man on the show. I wish I would have brought that to light.
It's my
irony.
It's my 1/8.
You are 1/8 black, so
that's it.
We would have been friends back in the hood, man. I would have accepted that.
That's my credit. So
you guys would have met at the Black Family Reunion.
You would. I would have. So what's interesting about Soapbox is when we're talking about Soapbox, people may be saying, well, like, what do you guys talk? Why do you call it a Soapbox? Why don't you call it a theme? Why don't you call it, something else? When we're talking about Soapbox, we're just talking about like basically the message or the moral of the story. We're talking about the what are you trying to contribute, that message you're trying to put out there. And some people call it a theme, some people call it a message. We call it a soapbox, and that term derives from the days before amplification, when people would want to spew political opinions. They would literally have to stand on a soapbox on a street corner and for people to hear them, and they were called soapboxers. And they would never stand up and try to give vague things, vague ideas. They would give specific opinions and their perspective on whatever issues that the people were dealing with. And so at 1-3 Creative, we as a team, we really make sure that that we're using the platform of entertainment in a socially responsible way to say, how do we put forth not just a vague theme, but a very specific messaging that goes into the entertainment. Because I think I'm very bullish on this fact that the greatest entertainment that stands the test of time over generations, it is the secret ingredient is that it pours out of the heart of the creator. It's like a preservative that goes into the entertainment. If something isn't connected to the heart of the creator in some way, some passionate way, then it may pop for a minute, maybe hot for a time, but it's like a sugar rush. It won't sustain over a time. It disappears. But I think the entertainment that comes out of the soul of the creator in a meaningful way is that is a preservative that then we remember 20, 30, 40, 50 years later, 100 years later, and because it connects with people in a different way. Do you guys remember as a kid, what was like the first song or movie or play or whatever that you engaged with that you were impacted by the message, that you were moved by the message of the entertainment?
For me, I think I mentioned it earlier. It was the movie E.T.
Right.
It was just like that acceptance and belonging is such an important thing, because so many people feel out of place. And as a kid, I remember going to a new school in third grade and feeling out of place and almost feeling like this alien, and
Yeah.
finding that first friendship and that first connection with someone was so important,
Yeah.
to help me feel accepted.
That was great. That's great. For me, the first time I remember it was Superman, watching Superman, and I just like really connected with that, with the old Christopher Reeve Superman movies, and really just connected with what Superman stood for. I was always a Superman fan.
Me too. Yeah.
And I always preferred, because what he stood for, and this is why it's even still today, I love Superman, but also love in the Marvel side of things, Captain America, just like what they stood for as characters, and like the truth, justice, American way sort of a thing. Like that always resonated with me as a kid, and I, as a character, not just the plot, but just the character of Superman. I remember senses of patriotism, senses of just like, what's good, truth is good, how to do the right thing even when it's hard. Those themes that stood for Superman as a kid, as a small kid, even before I turned into my nerdy book reading self, Trav, just like was really this is why I was impacted more by Superman, drawn to Superman as a kid more than Batman, because I always felt like Batman had a sort of different vibe to him, right? Like that it wasn't.
You couldn't relate to him as much. He was cool.
Yeah, Batman was cool to me, but he wasn't as important as Superman. And so yeah, that was my first memory of being impacted by not the plot, but the meaning behind that character.
Yeah, I remember even like when that was like one of the first VHSs that we sat down as a family to watch. Yeah, I was so excited, and it just it blew me away. I was like, well, impacted this.
Yeah, right. And a lot of people. Go ahead, Jeff.
I was just trying to think of that first movie that I remember that impacted me, but I think the trigger for me, unfortunately, is a little different. Is I told my family, I was in fourth grade, that we all should see Splash with Tom Hanks.
Oh, right.
Oh, yeah. I remember that.
And they took my advice, and we went. And I loved Tom Hanks. It's my
who doesn't love Tom Hanks?
Actor.
Yeah.
He's the person I want to meet, him and Denzel. I met Leo, got that checked off. And we all went, and it just, the emotion of like my family sitting there watching Splash. But as far as Soapbox related deep meaning, when my family got me to sit down and watch The Color Purple, was that directed by Steven Spielberg, right?
Sure.
And watching that relationship, that the man treat his wife, which was played by Whoopi Goldberg, so poorly, and how the pretty woman in the movie embraced Whoopi Goldberg and made her feel loved. She was just looking for love. There were so many different layers in that like period piece, and being reunited with her kids. I mean, that just touched me as a young person. And then of Menace to Society, I loved, the black gangster hood rat films, but just seeing from like what was going on in South Central and what you had to do. Those two opposite ends of the spectrum as a youngster stood out a ton.
For me, Boys in the Hood, man, Boys in the Hood wrecked me as a kid. It was so irrelevant to me, not in a pejorative way, but growing up in northeastern Kentucky and seeing a story in South Central, like it was hard for me to relate. But that the tragedy when you watch that movie, that got me as a kid, like that that kind of tuned me into the struggle of growing up in an environment like that, and I just wasn't in tune with that. And so yeah, Boys in the Hood for me, that was super impactful.
Yeah.
But yeah,
you went to that black family reunion.
That
like what was that in Kentucky? It was like a big party or something? Or?
Yeah. So as a kid, my so I grew up in northeastern Kentucky, very not very rural, but very kind of Mayberry like. It's in Appalachia, it's in the mountains. It's on the border of West Virginia and Ohio and Kentucky, kind of where they all butt together. And when Cincinnati was about 2 hours away, and every year my parents would take us to the Black Family Reunion, which was just a festival on the river of Cincinnati, and it was awesome. It was like this amazing cultural thing. We were pretty much the only white people that were there. But I loved just because it was interesting. Where I grew up was it was wildly white, right? I mean, it was like 99.9% white, and it was like there were so many white people. You didn't even have the opportunity to be racist because you couldn't be racist against anybody because it was so whitewashed, right? And so credit to my parents, where it would take us out of that bubble and drive 2.5 hours away and make sure that we spent time in just a larger urban center of Cincinnati, but then specifically at a cross-cultural festival that exposed us to a lot of different ideas, a lot of different art, a lot of different music, and it was cool. It was a really super interesting way to spend the summer. Right, every summer we go to Reds games, we would do all this, but we'd always go down to the river to the Black Family Reunion. So it wasn't just like we didn't crash somebody's actual reunion, right? But it was just a festival that everybody would go to. So no, this concept of creating entertainment that's important, entertainment that is connected with meaning, that's connected with emotion, I think is such a powerful thing. And the reason why I think it's so important is because when we do that as creators, when we create from a place of meaning and purpose, we connect with the audience differently. And it gets into all this like kind of hippie, metaphysical, spiritual conversation. Because Travis, as a music producer, as an artist, you understand this. Like you can have one vocalist be singing a song, and she can sing in the right key. Her pitch is fine. She sticks to the melody. Everything's great. Like technically, she checks all the boxes, right? Then you have another vocalist come right after her, sing the exact same song in the exact same key, exact same arrangement, exact same melody. But if the second vocalist believes every word that she's singing, we as the audience hear it differently. It connects with us differently, right? And like you have but what's interesting is technically that doesn't make sense because she's in the same key with the same melody, the same arrangement, everything's exactly the same. But when you can connect in that that non-quantifiable way emotionally, then all of a sudden it creates a different product, right? That we receive, right? That's the essence, Travis, of soul music.
Yeah, I was thinking about Bradley Cooper, Lady Gaga, and you think even him watching that movie and I've seen so many renditions of the "Tell Me Something, Girl."
Yeah, The Shallows, yeah.
So, and a lot of people, it's a great song. So they sing it, they put it out on YouTube. But I think them as actors, and as actors, you have to, me being an actor, what I'm taught to is to go into a real place if you want to pull this off.
Sure.
You could hear the real place. Bradley Cooper's he's a good singer, but he's not the greatest singer. That's not his first thing. Maybe it is. But what I heard in those two and what I heard in those vocals, you could hear the passion. I could hear more passion over the simple vocal, but them emoting more than if I heard someone on YouTube who just had a really good voice and could do a lot of riffs and runs.
Sure.
There was something about when they did it. I think they tapped in to that, and
probably much to the uncomfortableness of Bradley Cooper's wife at the Oscars. I saw that Oscar performance. That Oscar performance, like him and Lady Gaga, like got into like an emotional place that everybody's like, whoa. Like, and it made the song so much better. But then, like, cut to his wife, like, 15 feet away, and you're thinking, okay, wonder what she's thinking about this, right? Like, but that's it's the
if
life
she
of
was
acting.
black, she would have been in that crowd. Oh, we talked about this. Oh no.
Right.
Oh,
But yeah,
I think you can feel that though. Like, you know how you go to a concert and then the songs they're going to sing.
Yeah.
Like if you're a fan of them, that it's the same lyrics, the same arrangement, like you said, but sometimes there can be a good concert and a bad concert. And it's like, it's the artist's own music, right? But sometimes they really feel it and they connect to their own music, and their performance, so the passion drips out or bursts out almost.
Sure, 100%.
But then other times when they're tired and they're just on the road and they don't feel it, it doesn't feel like something that's jumping out and connecting with you. And so connecting to that art is so important.
If you've ever read a Hemingway novel, that dude bled every word on the page. Like you could just tell, like the dude, I mean, you can imagine just like, it's almost like he's typing so hard his fingers are bleeding. That's what it feels like when you read a Hemingway novel. Because
I love his short stories.
Tremendous.
He always just like finds a moment that he connects to and just fleshes it out in a way that you feel like you're there.
Daniel Day-Lewis is an actor that does that from an acting perspective, right? He puts himself, he connects so much with those roles. It's super, super dramatic.
You know what's interesting bringing this up, Soapbox and things being believable and how they galvanize and bring people in. I read a lot of personal development books. That's my thing, doing a lot of personal business development for us. And so personal development, business development is big. I just embraced that. And I was reading a book, Pitch Anything, which you also read. It's a great book. What's the author's name again?
Orrin Hatch. Cleft.
Okay.
Yes.
Cleft. Yeah.
Let me look it up.
But he I was listening to it on audio as well, but he did the audio. It made a huge difference.
Oh, yeah.
The inflections, the passion in his voice, rather than just hiring some cool guy who has a good voice to read. When it was coming from the author who's been through these battles, and you're hearing these battles, the joy, the funniness, the frustration, it drew me in. And then I promote the book for him to different salespeople that I come across and say, hey, and listen to the audio, listen to this guy.
Yeah.
It makes a huge difference. And a lot of people have. So I think there's something to that. And having Soapbox and creating from that, being creative and letting that dictate all your creative decisions for your story. It doesn't have to lead to corny stories, boring stories. It can be
100%.
embedded in everything. Because I think about, and I don't know if they did this, but I think about the movie The Matrix. That's one of my favorite movies of all time. I loved it, and you know why I loved it is because of the message embedded. And I don't know if they embedded the message that I'm thinking of, but I thought about, I'm a Christian, so I like Jesus Christ, and I like the story. I like the subject of faith. And I've never seen a movie personify and teach on faith. So in the Bible, they say faith is the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things unseen. So Neo had to go through these trainings and these battles to believe he could do something that he could see, jumping over buildings, flying, this and that. I said, if this is not the coolest way to show what I could show to youth group and kids, hey, you want to learn about faith? You want to learn about self-sacrifice, what this meant? Great story that you could spread, and every decision based on there from the beginning to the end about when he's in the regular world to into the Matrix was about believing something bigger. I think it just that just goes to show that you don't have to be corny, like, oh, why do I have to have meaning? Well, no, that meaning is getting somebody somewhere.
So
I think what you hit on there is that, I mean, there's been a lot of really cool movies, a lot of really cool art that use the technology of the day and even that push technology forward and this and that. But what you hit on is that it has the meaning that's really the foundation of it, So there's tons of movies that they spent millions and millions, hundreds of millions of dollars creating that we don't even remember, because when we were done, we kind of walked away and we didn't even remember it. It didn't connect with us. But something like that, where it's a deep, profound meaning, plus there's great art that's telling that story, then that's when you have these all-time greats.
Sure, I think that what you're talking about is resonance, right? It is is it hollow, or is there something deeper there? I mean, I always think about like you almost think about soapbox stories with great soapboxes. It's almost like you create reverb, like in a music sense, with the
Yeah.
story, to where you like the story happens, but then the reverb like carries on, right? And you can because it like you walk away and you're impacted emotionally, and you continue to think about it and contemplate it, and you talk about it with your friends later, and I mean, potentially years later, that you'll still have conversations about the emotionally impactful thing that resonated, that reverbed out, right? That reverberated out. But if you don't have that soapbox, it's like turning all the reverb down, a completely like dry room, and like you hit it, boom, nothing, right? Like there's a sound, but it stops right there. And and I just don't think that those things. I mean, those can be cool, right? But and those can pop, and those can be commercially successful. But ultimately, I don't think they're lasting. The Greeks had a this concept called Meraki. That the concept of Meraki is when you create something with all of your heart and soul, you don't just create the product or create the thing. A little piece of your soul goes with it, right? So that then when people experience that thing, they don't just experience the thing; they actually experience your soul. So a painter who paints a painting with all of their heart and soul, um, they're not just painting paint on canvas. A little piece of that soul goes with it, so that when you see that painting later, somebody else, the audience, sees the painting. They don't just see the painting; they see the soul. And
Right.
that and that's sort of an X factor, right? That it goes into the creation, and that can be rooted in political messaging, and that can be rooted in religious messaging, which I think is fine. But that also can just be whatever you're passionate about, right? Like whatever you find meaningful. And so you can root soapbox in what do you want to say about family? What do you want to say about work life balance? What do you want to say about like your love of animals and your love of dogs? I was talking to a girl, a screenwriter, who was very much just not in tune with this, and she was very resistant because she's resistant to connecting her passions to her work. She just wanted to do whatever was marketable, whatever high concept was trending at that point. Vampire movies are super popular right now, so I'm going to do a vampire movie, right? I'm going to spec this for HBO because this seems to be trending that way, without really ever centering on something that she even cared about. And I kept asking her, like, what do you care about? Like, what gets you up in the morning? What like drives you? What do you think about when nobody's around? Like what is that thing that you connect with? And she wasn't religious, she wasn't super political, but she thought for a minute and she said, giraffes. And I said, giraffes? She said, yeah, giraffes. She says, I love giraffes. And I said, okay. And then she goes on and starts talking for like 10 minutes about like the majesty that is a giraffe, and how awesome they are, and how their hearts are the size of basketballs, and how a baby giraffe is 6 feet tall when it's born, and how they how fast they can run, and how they can kill a lion with a kick, and how she hates those big game hunters that like will shoot a giraffe and take a picture and put it on a Facebook. She hates those guys, and like she goes on and on. And when somebody, it's such a dramatic thing, and I think you guys know what I'm talking about. When somebody connects to their passion, they act completely differently. Because when when I was meeting with this person, she's like cool, and she's kind of like a low key person, and she's like slumped back a little bit, and she's talking. But when she starts talking about giraffes, and this is what anybody does when they talk about their passion, they sit up straighter, their eyes widen, their voice goes up an octave, right, and you lock in. And I said, listen, the greatest thing you'll ever make in your whole life will be something about giraffes. I don't know what that is. I don't know how to make that marketable. I don't know how to make that cool. But like before you retire and before you die, you need to create something that has to do with giraffes. I don't know if it'll be the most commercially
That's hilarious.
thing, but like that will be so fulfilling for her to be able to do that because she connects to a purpose, right? And that's what
I bet I bet she would connect to someone. I bet she would. I don't know if there was a purpose or a soapbox behind the Tiger King, but here is all of America, and here's I'm this black dude from 92nd and Cherry from East Oakland, and I'm watching about these hick type folk in Oklahoma and fighting, and did she kill her husband or not? And it was really interesting. But there was a soapbox in there. Who's right? Who's fair? Is it fair that he went down? And so it's interesting, that giraffe story. I'm just saying that
Super
if
interesting.
there's a passion behind it, and if there's a soapbox, I think the soapbox is what draws all of us together beyond racial barriers, religious beliefs. Because when I talk about neo and faith, faith is a part of every religion, and that's a part of, even if you're an atheist, you want to believe that you can do something greater, and sometimes you have to take risks and steps. So it speaks to that as well.
Yeah.
So that soapbox does that, and that's why I want to ask you this question. And I'll preface it with this. I don't know if you remember, Houston, we were at some type of personal development. We were doing like the millionaires something club where you learn about business. And I think there was a lady there who was saying, I'm going to pick my occupation, my next thing that I do in life, as if she was picking it, blindfolded her eyes, and went on LinkedIn. And if you could scroll LinkedIn like the Wheel of Fortune wheel, and whatever stops on doctor. Okay, let me go into that next. That makes money. Remember, she says, I'm going to pick my occupation on whatever is kind of trending and makes money. And we kind of looked at each other and like, I wonder how long you'll last in that.
Yeah.
And so we have creators
Yeah.
who are probably doing the same thing. So two-part question: how successful do you two think that is, to say, okay, I'm just going to make a movie. I'm going to make the next cool rom-com just because rom-coms are back in, or I'm going to make the next great period sword and sandal piece because, hey, that's hot right now. Or do you think you should 100% of the time say, I'm going to find that advice that you were talking about, that meaningful thing, and build my world around that, my story, my creation, and center it on that, getting that message out, that good advice out, that religious topic out, or whatever it is?
Sure.
What is your take on that?
I mean, I think sometimes the skill of an artist can be pretty good, and they're able to make something that maybe could resonate with someone on some level, but without the real heart behind it and the real message, like Houston said, there's no resonance there. It's gonna have a pretty short life in the minds of the viewers. It's not something they're gonna take with them out of the experience and be able to actually use in their life. It's gonna be pretty forgettable,
Sure.
I think.
Sure. No, and I think practically speaking, the problem with this now, if we're talking about trying to get your own projects sort of through the pipeline and realize your own projects, um, your passion and your connection to the piece puts gas in your in the gas tank, right? I think I think it's almost the difference between lust and love. Okay. Uh, uh, People say, "Well, I love filmmaking. I love this. I love this." Really, they. I think a lot of them lust after it, right? Like it's sexy, it's cool. Like you want to do a vampire movie because the vampire movie's popping right now, whatever. And you think your love of filmmaking is going to see that through. Like we all know, everybody knows, like entertainment is too frustrating, too hard, takes too long. Like finding the money is like you hear so many no's. Like it's so difficult to be able to make it through, to finally realize something actually in the marketplace. If it if you're not connected to the content of your of whatever you're doing, right? Then you'll burn out. You'll stop. It's not worth it. Like it's too hard. You're gonna get too frustrated. You're gonna get like it's you'll move on to something else, right? Just like lust. If your only connection to a partner is lust, You think a girl's sexy, you think a guy's hot, and that's what your relationship is built upon. As soon as you start to get to those tough points in a relationship, as soon as you start to have the arguments and the financial troubles and the, or an illness or a sickness and things like that, once you get to the tough parts, the real parts, you're going to leave.
She like burps or farts a lot in the morning, and you're like,
that's
expected
right.
that.
Like, you're like, well, okay, yeah, that the lust isn't going to see you through, right? Like the lust is fleeting. The love, that real substance, is what is going to make it through. And I think you have to love what you're doing.
Makes me think about, you were talking about The Matrix earlier. One of the great pieces of art in our lifetime, because it was done with great skill, plus had that really good meaning behind it. But then if you look at the Wachowski brothers or siblings later in their careers, when they were just trying to fulfill their Warner Brothers contract and make movies just to fulfill it, they had giant budgets, they had all the stars you could ask for, and time and time again the movies were bad and super forgettable. It was hard to get through them. But then something like, remember when Winter's Bone came out, like you didn't know who that artist was that made it. You didn't really know Jennifer Lawrence was yet, but it connected so well that like it made a huge impact on me.
It's interesting because a lot of when you take it to albums in the rap genre, these guys, their best album is typically that very first one. They'll be telling that story of their life, the rags to riches, the David versus Goliath, me against the world story, and you get into it, and people are sharing. Look at what he went to, and look what the passion, the lyrics, and then they tend to get each album. Not that it's not as creative, because production gets better. They're getting more money. But something about those first albums typically resonate, and people talk, and it becomes like their masterpiece, the thing that they can lean on.
Sure. I mean, you think about the comedians are the same way, right? You look, whether it's like, Eddie Murphy to Adam Sandler to, or somebody like Jay-Z, it doesn't matter. Like usually the early stuff is better because you're hungry, right? There's so much passion and drive there. And then once you get like rich and fat and comfortable, it's tough to be able to kind of lock in to those things that are meaningful, right? I mean, I think, what's super interesting is looking at the difference from when Prince died. When Prince died, tragic. Prince was awesome, and he died way too young. And but when he died, like Twitter was really sad for 3 days, but then everybody moved on, right? And the conversation ended. When Nipsey Hussle died, his death resonated, I think, and maybe it's just because
there was legislatures that started putting things into place because of him,
right? I mean, maybe it's because we're just here in LA, and Nipsey's was, it had a bigger effect in LA. But I feel that like Nipsey's death is still resonating out because his brand was. I think Prince was probably more talented than they were talented in different ways. I guess it's hard to compare that. But let's say, like, for sake of argument, Prince was probably more talented than Nipsey. But Nipsey was building
by far.
Nipsey was building this brand on importance. Like he had meaning to everything he did.
He was building things for his community and doing it for the people.
Right.
And he was what it seemed like. Prince was much more famous. Nipsey was an underground artist. Never got anything on like top 40 or charted in the like top 10, I believe. And I could be wrong, but my brother was telling me something who's close to that whole scene. But it's funny because when you have what he stand for, how he hired ex-cons in his stores to give them a chance.
Guys that couldn't get work anywhere else.
His soapbox was, people deserve a second chance. Let's not write people off. Sure. That's what he stood on. So, and then he acted on that. People get behind that. People did get behind that. And I think that's an awesome thing. There's always going to be someone who believes like you believe. And even if they weren't your friend before it ever heard of you, even if they're some white or black congresswoman who believes that they'll say, oh, there's this guy who lives down in South Central and he's doing something for this and that. I want to talk to him because I want to have a legislation that I'm building up and I'm going to partner. Then all of a sudden he's at his messaging, his music, who he is, it all rises as the water rises. So
Sure.
I think that's pretty an interesting thing to really point out and stick on.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that when we're talking, the key ingredient to Soapbox, and because we always want to make sure we have a immense amount of value, practical value in these podcasts and vidcasts. When we're talking about a soapbox, I think the key ingredient, practically speaking, is perspective. Is what is your opinion? It's not just the theme. I mean, we talk about theme a lot. Creators talk about themes a lot. My theme is good versus evil. My theme is love. My theme is income inequality. When we're talking about soapbox is like super theme, or like theme on bath salts, right? Like it's just, like just a jetpack strapped to theme, and we're doing something bigger and more specific. So what is your perspective and your commentary on that theme? I don't care about a theme, really. I care about you as a creator giving me a window into your soul and saying, right, what do you, Brad, what do you, Travis, what do you feel about love? What's your perspective on love? What's your perspective on family? What's your perspective on police brutality? What's your perspective on income inequality? What's your perspective on liberty and freedom, right? Like you as a person, not a fake you, not what you think is going to be trendy, like you. And that creates that authenticity. In a world of Instagram fakeness, I think authenticity is now going to be valued more than ever before, and just being real and not just flexing and flossing just so people will think you're cool, but like be vulnerable and open yourself up and give that perspective. And so when we're building a soapbox, we say, what's the theme that we think is important to talk about? What's the topic we want to discuss? And then what is the perspective, the unique commentary that we can now bring to the table, right? Mm-hmm. And then we will all then want to take it a step further and create advice out of that, right? If our opinion is true, then what advice would we give people, right? So let's just say our topic was love. And if I just say my theme is love, my topic is love, that doesn't give you any insight into me, like what I feel about love, what I believe about love, right? And so you're not really going to, there's not going to be a connection. There's going to be a disconnect because like we're not connecting as people. But if I say my opinion on love, and that can be anything, and let's just say for the sake of argument, if I say love, and then my opinion about love is that love at first sight doesn't exist. You may not agree with that. You may agree with that. I don't know. I think it's okay to create a soapbox that people don't agree with, because that creates conversation.
But it'll elicit feelings about that topic in the viewer if they feel that the creator and the artist who's presenting that topic is connecting to their passion and presenting their opinion about it. Then that's going to make you think about your own opinions about it.
Absolutely,
and that's where the dialogue and the conversation happens, and that's where you can get somewhere about for that topic.
And it will make for
conversations as much as we should.
Exactly. And I think that it makes for a very deep, rich, and layered story. Let's say you're talking about love. What do you say? Okay, my opinion is, if you truly love someone, you're rich and your fiance is poor, you won't make them sign a prenuptial agreement.
Mm.
And if you're thinking prenuptial, then you may not really, truly love them. There's something in the back of your mind saying it's not going to happen.
Sure.
So then you can create a whole story, a series on the prenup and when it works and when it doesn't work, and it just spreads. But what happens then too is when you have these soapboxes and you have this topic and this opinion about it, if you're a creator, you don't have a lot of money, then what you can do is start putting that soapbox out there on different platforms in different ways, talking about it on a podcast as it relates to your story, your movie, your characters, talking about on Facebook, creating memes. There's some really cool social things that you can do, all from the soapbox, partnering with certain community partners.
It starts a movement, right? Like what's the difference between a movement and it creates sort of non-fictional aspects to your brand, right? And I think super smart, Trav. But we all, I think you watched A Marriage Story. You watched A Marriage Story with Adam Driver and
Oh yeah,
Scarlett
that
Johansson.
was that
And
was good. I loved it.
So the topic and the theme about that is divorce, right? Like that, it deals with divorce or marriage, right? Either one, right? And but it doesn't leave you to equivocate like what is it are we that we're supposed to believe about divorce, right? That story has such a specific perspective about divorce. The topic is divorce, but the opinion is divorce is wildly destructive, right? Divorce is an awful thing. It does not paint divorce in a good light at all in any way, right?
No.
And about how once you get something, these things, these little things started, they can just like snowball and snowball and snowball and snowball into big things until finally they're actually in court. And it's just like, it's such a tragic story that there's nobody that can walk away from that film thinking, wow, I'm glad they got divorced. Like, I'm glad they went through that. Like, the perspective of the creator is so clear on that, and that's why it resonates. But here's the thing: here's the trick. This is what's going to finalize the soapbox. We have topic, we have opinion, right? Which is your perspective, but we also have advice. So, if the opinion is true, what advice would you give people? So, if divorce is a wildly destructive thing that negatively impacts not only the spouses but also the children that are involved, what's the advice that you would give people, right? Well, probably do everything you can not to get divorced. Work out these small things. Don't run so quickly to divorce because it ends up being such an awful thing, right? Like it creates a call to action to the consumer, which is an important aspect of brand building, right? Call to actions are big, but it lets people know, okay, cool. This is sort of what the movement's about. Now it creates a movement of like, let's work out the small stuff, right? So that they don't turn into big things, right? Now we know actually how to start walking the soapbox out in our lives. And that actually can create meaningful change in people's lives rather than just being a cool story. So soapbox, opinion, advice, those things go together, and it gives you sort of those building blocks to be able to really, build something meaningful out. I love, I don't listen to a lot of Kelly Clarkson music, but she has a song called Piece by Piece. I don't know if you've heard of it. But she has an interesting story about when she was a kid. She was 5 or 6, and her real dad walked out, right? And then she had a stepdad that swoops in and like takes the place of the real dad and sort of fills that void, and is an awesome guy, raises her. And then later in life, when she gets famous, guess who comes back? Real dad. Right, real dad pops back in the picture. Obviously, that doesn't go super well because he's only back for money. And then she has her own children, and she tells this story in the song. And the whole song is sort of a, screw you, real dad. Thank you, stepdad. And here's my commitment to you, my child, that I'll never do the same thing to you. And I'm not a big Kelly Clarkson fan, but when I heard her perform that song for the first time, it was like so super impactful for me, and because she had a topic, right? Abandonment, or and she had an opinion that when a parent walks out on a child, it leaves a wake of destruction behind that the child has to figure out how to deal with, right? But then at the same time, it has advice, which is don't leave your stinking kids, right? Like, don't do that. Right now, I connect differently to that song than maybe you do, Brad, right? Like, because my parents never got divorced, right? So I can't really understand that aspect of it, of like, I never had a parent leave. I never had a parent separate. But the thing that I connect the most with that song is I have a little girl that's 5 or 6, and I can now imagine what she would have to go through if I walked out, right? But now you not having kids, but being a child of a family that did separate, you could probably relate to that song in a different way, right? And which is kind of cool that we can all connect differently to these things, right? And Travis, you probably have a completely different perspective that you encounter with that stuff, right? Because you've dealt with step parents and things like that, right? And like you'll have a different take on it as well. So
Absolutely.
it's just such an
Yeah,
interesting thing.
it is. It sparks so much thought because as you bring that up and what that means, I immediately thought the feelings that I had when I was 10, when my mom and dad divorced, and we spent 2 years living in with our grandmother while my mom and dad stayed in California to go through the divorce. They were young, early 20s, getting their lives together, and so they could bring us back to California.
Yeah.
So my mother brings us back to California. Within a year and a half of living with her, she's murdered. And so immediately after that, I had this resentment, not against my mom, but just as a deep seated thing with abandonment. Like she didn't abandon, but I said, parents, stay with your kids as much as possible. You don't know how much time you have with them because I started as a kid, I was adding up the years I got to live with my mom. I'm like, wow, they take that 2 year break of a divorce and I get back with my mom in a year and a half, boom, she's gone until I see her in heaven. So I had a strong topic and opinion, and then the advice to go with that as you were speaking with that. Then when I moved to California, when I was 30 and left my kids in Ohio, I was pursuing my dream to get a record deal, which I was able to get. But as I was out here in California and they're in their like 10, 11, 12, 13, I flew back once a month, no matter how broke I was living in California, because I thought about what happened with me and my mom. So it dictated my
Sure.
decisions. Yeah.
Right, yeah, and I
Sorry
think
to go off on that tangent, but
No, it's
you
good.
just made me think about all that.
Yeah,
but what's
sure.
important about when you're telling your story with that passion and that connection, it doesn't mean that the audience has to have your exact situation, but
Right.
it elicits their own feelings about that situation, and like I said, the conversation starts. But also, what's key is in order to really elicit those feelings and connect with the message, is the story has to be well told.
100%.
It has to be done with some skill and some thought and some art. You don't want to just be on your soapbox and then just preaching,
Yes.
just like laying out on the nose what the message is. You want to have some skill in your storytelling as well.
I mean, that's where, and that's the line, because we've all seen things, we've all seen movies that are way too preachy, that like, it's the message is like clubbing you over the head, right? With this stuff, right? But yeah, if you're artful in it and you're tactful and you understand sort of how to do it and you understand how to wrap it in a dressing of great story, then you're going to hit on two levels. One thing that I think is interesting. Trav, is just how differently you could relate to that soapbox, just at different stages in life. Like you had one experience as a kid, and then when you became a father, now you're seeing that whole thing from a different perspective and a new perspective. And
I became my parents, and I was like, am I them? And I kind of condemned them as a kid, but now I'm leaving to go to California, and my kids are in Ohio. It's interesting.
It's such an interesting thing because now there's this concept called phenomenology that I was introduced to by this guy named Brian Clark, his old Transmedia guy. He passed away a few years ago tragically from cancer, but he did a thing.
That speech.
Yeah, just
it was good.
How we experience things differently in life, different times in life, and I was watching The Return of the Jedi recently, and at the end of that movie, Darth Vader throws the Emperor into the pit, and and the electricity that the Emperor is shooting out kind of ruins Darth Vader's suit, and he ends up he sacrifices, he dies, right? Anakin Skywalker dies there at the end of Return of the Jedi. One of the controversies of the sequel trilogy has been the revival of the Emperor, and you have a lot of fanboys on Twitter and on social media that are saying when J.J. Abrams brought the Emperor back, it ruined the sacrifice, or rendered meaningless the sacrifice of Darth Vader, Anakin Skywalker in Return of the Jedi, because he died for nothing. Right. And that's, that's sort of the hot take that people have. But it's super interesting when I was watching that is that battle, what he does at the end of the Return of the Jedi is not about beating the boss at the end of the video game board, right? Like it's not just winning the plot, fixing the need. It's like what he does is Anakin
Him
Skywalker,
deciding to do what's right, you know.
and it's not even just what's right. It's there's the right phrase peeking in. So it's not even what's right. It's like, Anakin. If you follow Anakin Skywalker's through the prequel trilogy, like Anakin never had a dad, right? He was taken from his mom by Qui-Gon, and Qui-Gon was going to be like a father figure in his life, and then Qui-Gon died, right? And so Obi-Wan was more like a brother, was never really that father figure for Anakin. So Anakin grew up without a dad. But what was so interesting is that at the end of Return of the Jedi, it wasn't about defeating the Emperor. It was about saving his kid. It was about sacrificing himself for his child. And even if they bring, and he died being the good dad that he never had. And whether you bring the Emperor back later or what, that doesn't minimize the sacrifice or the message of what a parent is supposed to do for their child. And I don't think I would ever have really gotten that until I had a kid. Right. And I just don't understand that. I wouldn't have understood that perspective. So this is but there's an artful storytelling that goes along with that. Right. There's just there's a way to pull that off that it may be 20 years later before you realize like, oh, okay, like I get it. Right. You don't have to like beat someone in the face with it. So and one like tactical thing that I think that you can do is take your soapbox and build it into the concept of the story world itself, right?
Yeah,
We always talk about world building and you tell stories inside the worlds, but if you take the soapbox and build it into the concept of the world, then what that does is it liberates you from having to, every story you tell in that world doesn't have to be that same message all the time, because the message will always be there intrinsically and it's unspoken. So if you watch Wall-E, I don't know if you guys remember Wall-E. Wall-E's great. I watched it recently. It holds up. The message of the story world is an environmental message. Like don't get so caught up on your own selfish needs that you forsake the planet. Right. Don't let the planet go to crap just because you want to take care of yourself. Right. I think that's clearly what that message is, though it's never spoken. In fact, nothing's ever spoken in Wall-E. It doesn't have any dialogue. Right. But we feel that soapbox even without the words being communicated. Right. But what's super interesting is the soapbox of the plot of Wall-E is not an environmental message. It's a love story. It's about the little junky robot falling in love with like the super hot new robot. And despite the fact that she's way out of his league, he goes after her regardless, right? Like that has nothing to do with the environment. That has nothing to do about sort of the larger soapbox. It's a love story. And it's about being able to love who you want to love, despite what society says who you should love, right? And so what I think is so cool about that is the environmental message is there, though they felt the freedom to be able to kind of nuance some different types of storytelling on top of that, but not at the sacrifice of that main soapbox, right? So if you do good world building, you put that soapbox inside the world itself.
Yeah, I think that harkens me back to what I was asking earlier. When people pick their jobs, do you do it for passion? Do you do it just because it makes money? I think there's a little balance. If you want to make a film and you love a certain genre, pick that. If there's a certain genre that's hitting, a certain style of music that's hitting, that's popping at that time, you can pick that, but port your soapbox in that genre, port it in the world to give it a longer lasting effect and overall a greater reach, a greater community, greater money. Let's talk about everything, nothing wrong with that. So that would be my advice.
One of my favorite filmmakers is James Cameron, and that's a guy who poured his passion into his projects, and like you were saying, he didn't stick on one genre. I mean, if you look at Terminator to Aliens, True Lies, Titanic, like
Avatar. Yeah.
Whatever he was like really into at the time, he put his passion into it, and he found a way to still have, good message and a connectable story in there. But
Sure.
he did kind of build a story world that you kind of, you love to explore, and you can kind of see meaning all throughout it.
100%.
And
Right.
he was super successful with it,
Now, Trav, quickly, I want to end as we end this conversation on Soapbox. I think, and I know we all believe this, but I am like 1,000% bullish on the fact that in the room pitching, Soapbox is the secret weapon. Soapbox is the thing that like especially filmmakers, they get in their head and they say, well, we got to go in and we got to have our log line, we got to have whatever, and they get so caught up in the technicalities of being able to structure their pitch in a specific way that some sort of industry person told them to do, but pitching with a soapbox first, I think, is so effective to break people out of that analytical frame mind, or that frame, right, and to get them in a different mind frame, and like really a heart frame when they're listening to your pitch. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, absolutely. I think that it's the hook. Honestly, they hear a million stories, a million log lines, but when you go into a room to impress someone and to get something sold, the number one thing that you hear this and it's maybe overused, but people buy you.
Sure.
You have a story, but the you part comes in when you're talking about, hey, I'm creating this story. This was heavy on my heart, and I feel that would make the world a better place. This would make families do this, or and it affected me in this personal way. All of a sudden, they got into your story. All of a sudden, they may be thinking about something they went through with a kid, son, nephew, wife, whatever, and that could be the one thing that makes them listen to the next sentence of that log line and gets them the story. The log line may not even be great, but because you position your why and your soapbox so well, they say, let's get this made.
Sure.
Let's do this song.
And what happens in the room is typically that, like, when you go in for a pitch, they'll have like their notebook open and their pen, and they're ready to write and ready to take notes. And when you start talking about the soapbox and why you connect to the project, and why you're passionate about it, and why it's not just cool but also important, not just to you but also culture, what I've noticed they do practically is they take their pen and they put it down, and then they're just like, they start listening, right? And if you can get them to put their pen down, it's a tremendous thing, because now you're connecting here, not just here. If they stay here the entire pitch, they're going to be thinking, the budget, like what's the budget of this, how we're going to market this, how we're going to sell it, right? But when you get it here, they're thinking, man, we have to figure out how to make this thing, or even if we can't make it, I'm going to connect you to somebody else. I'm going to refer you over here and pull this other person in, and it's just it's effective.
And for those who are listening from the podcast, then Houston was pointing at his brain. When they're in their head space, it's not good. As good as when they're in their heart space, and he pointed to his heart. Got to get him in the heart.
Thank you.
That's what affects people.
Right? Yeah, 100%. Right. So, and we'll talk about fan community stuff later, maybe in a separate episode. But I think what's so cool about Soapbox is that, one, you're going to build a fan community and build a community around your entertainment, right? I mean, people are just fans of your stories. But having an effective soapbox, Brad, I think inspires community that may not love the genre of your story, may not love that type of platform that you've released, right? But if you can get people to believe in what you stand for, and to like and understand what you're trying to achieve, you will inspire people to be part of your community just based on the soapbox alone.
Yeah, absolutely. And then they're going to be bringing in other people that maybe didn't even think about that type of genre, but they're connecting to that, the message behind the story as well. And that's how you build that following.
Sure.
Well, here's what I'll say in conclusion. I found my quote. It would make for a great movie. There's been tons of movies made based on this, I think. The Fox and the Hound. But one thing that Martin Luther King Jr. said is this, and I love this topic and opinion. He says, Love is the only force capable of transforming an enemy into a friend.
That's good.
Let's make some movies on that.
That's it, man. I love that. Right. I mean, I'm so bullish on this, on Soapbox. I'm just like a soapbox guy. I know we all are. We are a purpose-driven company. I think we, especially in today's coronavirus, COVID-19 reset that we're going through, stories with meaning are going to be more important than ever before. I mean, use this as an opportunity to reset your career and reset your life, reset your emotional compass in a way to say, I'm going to spend. I mean, we all see how vulnerable life is and how vulnerable everything is. Don't take the we're given a platform of entertainment through a democratized technological culture. We're giving platforms for entertainment, and if you just use that to make whatever's popping, and just whatever makes money, if it doesn't make dollars, doesn't make sense, that sort of mentality, man, like you're wasting an opportunity. Use this with what's the Spider-Man quote, right? With great power comes great responsibility. I think we have a social responsibility to speak into people's lives in a way that builds them up, right? That improves their lives, that connects emotionally. It's going to help everything. Everything in the whole thing.
And Spider-Man stole that from the Bible.
That's it.
Yeah, just so everyone knows, a lot of things come from the Bible, you guys. Not preaching to you, just letting you know that
I love it.
A lot of Hollywood steals some things out of there.
So for the if you're listening to if you're watching the YouTube video, we're going to do a special segment here that's not going to be on the audio podcast. So if you're listening via audio podcast, we're going to start a segment every show where we're doing a mailbag. Right, people are sending us in videos and asking us questions. So if you're listening to the audio podcast, make sure you go to YouTube and check out the video. You can fast forward, check out the last several minutes to get that mailbag in all of our channels. So if you're just watching on YouTube, the podcast actually has exclusive content, primarily the smaller solo rounds the episodes that we weave in throughout the week, even between the big roundtable discussions that we have. And so I'm going to encourage everybody to subscribe and check out audio and video for the unique exclusive content. So we're just going to transition here, and we have a question here from Martin, and I'm going to share my screen so that we can see the question. Let's see what Martin says through the hopefully it doesn't lag, but through the magic of Zoom. Here it is.
Hi guys, I love your super story concept. And I was wondering why a studio doesn't take the Isaac Asimov I, Robot and Foundation series and use that as the IP for a super story. It's super layered, lots of movies that can be made above and beyond the I, Robot movie that Will Smith starred in. That's a standalone movie, but there's a whole universe behind it that would be really interesting to explore. And in a similar vein to the way the Marvel universe has the main universe and then the Guardians of the Galaxy universe, you could have an iRobot universe and a Foundation universe that meet eventually in some big super story. So if you guys could talk about that, I'd be really interested.
All right, thank you, Martin. So that was our first question. Appreciate that. So, just as a general aside, anybody that's watching, feel free to email us. Go to our website. You can contact us. Send in your questions. Find us on Twitter. Find us on LinkedIn. Send in your questions. So Isaac Asimov, iRobot series. Are you guys familiar with the iRobot movie and Isaac Asimov's universe?
Yeah, I mean, I remember watching the movie. I didn't realize that how much other adaptations and prequels and things existed already.
Right.
But yeah, it's a definitely pretty rich world there.
Yeah, sure. I always had a man crush on Will Smith, so I definitely watched the movie, and so I just remember the film.
Sure,
watched it.
So Martin, I think you're going to be happy about this because as of 2018, Apple has greenlit a show based on Isaac Asimov's Foundation series. So they were right in tune with you, Martin, in about the viability of the Foundation series. The iRobot actually got a little bit of pushback from Asimov fans because they kind of deviated from the source material quite heavily. But Apple now is developing the Foundation series. So, and I'm really excited to see how Apple begins to lean into the super story model. As we've seen with Amazon and Netflix, I think Apple is going to begin diversifying their content. I think they're establishing themselves obviously in the film and television, but their ecosystem is I think very specific when it comes to their understanding of multiple platforms. And so I think we'll start to see them releasing podcast material and books and things like that. So I have you watched any Apple content yet, Brad?
A little bit here and there, yeah.
Yeah, I've been super impressed with how Apple has handled their film and television. I think they have performed far better as far as quality than I anticipated. They seem to be a legitimate player in the streaming world.
Yeah, and they've kind of taken their time. You know, they're not rushing things to market. They're putting good creators and artists into it. I just looked at iRobot had an Atari game actually.
Oh, really?
when we were little, yeah.
Oh, wow. That's that's super interesting. Well, and listen, guys, I think as we see what Apple does with the Foundation series and how they sort of roll it out and sort of what kind of take they do and how they diversify it across platforms. That's going to be cool to see. But one thing that I would encourage people to do is check out old science fiction in the public domain. There's a lot of super cool stuff in the public domain that and because it's in the public domain, you don't have to pay for the rights for it. But if you look what's in the public domain, there's a lot of H.G. Wells stuff in the public domain. There's a lot of Jules Verne stuff in the public domain. There's a lot of super cool old sci-fi in that public domain that is 100% ripe for a super story, diversified, transmediated universe way that could be, very similar to what Apple will hopefully do with the Foundation series. But I think and what we're seeing now also on Amazon is that what they're leading into with Tales from the Loop is the new sci-fi show that they have based on this painting by Simon Stålenhag. These sci-fi worlds really lend themselves, as Martin was saying, to diversified models easily. We're not Superstory and diversified transmediated models aren't sci-fi exclusive, as we talked about previously in a previous episode, but definitely makes it easier, I think, just because the nature of the creative, right?
Yeah, I actually like the aesthetic of old sci-fi because it's like a lot of them, something like robots. We're not in a world of robots yet, but the way some of these older stories were written, it has elements of an older generation. Sure. So it almost feels like an alternate universe, alternate reality in a way.
Yeah.
So it's a good story world to build off of.
Yeah, I actually like the iRobot film. I actually liked it a lot. And I'm thinking of Soapbox and the whole Martin Luther King thing. If I'm remembering correctly, the robot started having more and more human characteristics and wanted a type of freedom or equality, if you will. Am I remembering that right?
Yeah, 100%. And but for the movie, I think diverged from the original source material. If I remember correctly, the movie has like sort of the violent robot revolt. But that was something that was never in the books, right? I could see where they would want it based on sort of the action for the film, but I think the Asimov fans sort of pushed back because it wasn't that way. But what was interesting about sort of the Foundation series as books is it kind of follows. It almost kind of goes into like the fall of the Roman Empire. But it reads as a historical novel, sort of as sci-fi, a really interesting blend of like genre. Something
else that's cool that I was seeing here is that Asimov kind of introduced these 3 laws of robotics.
Yeah.
in the short story. The first law: a robot may not injure a human being, or through inaction allow a human being to come to harm.
Right.
Second law: a robot must obey the orders given to it by human beings, except where such orders could conflict with the first law.
Sure.
And then the third law: a robot must protect its own existence as long as such protection does not conflict with the first or second law.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So you can kind of use this as a foundation to build your story world and even pump out different types of stories.
Sure. And I think that, if you look at the streamers, each streamer is sort of getting their foot into sort of a big sci-fi series. So with Amazon, the Tales from the Loop, I think is going to be a big thing for them. With Netflix, they have Altered Carbon, which they're building out what that universe is. With Apple now, we're seeing the Foundation series. With HBO Max, they're going heavy into Dune, right? And so they're everybody's kind of pulling on these old sci-fi properties as the foundational aspects of these tremendous story worlds, right? So we'll see where they go with it, Martin. But great book series. But at least Apple has it, and hopefully, again, I'm very bullish on Apple shows. From the morning show was great. M. Night Shyamalan's Servant was fantastic. I think C was pretty good. The Jason Momoa fantasy epic. They just have a lot of really good shows. My wife and I just watched what was the show we watched? Home Before Dark. That's what it was. Home Before Dark, which was sort of this little murder mystery type of a thing. They're just coming with quality content after quality content. They're doing quality over quantity. Netflix, it seems like they're going for quantity. Apple's really curating a lot of really great shows, so I think they're going to do well with the Foundation series. So cool. Well, thank you guys for jamming on Soapbox. I think this is a valuable thing. Speak and write and create from the heart, and I think that will never you'll never steer you wrong. And just going through the process of being introspective, finding out what you're passionate about, that is just good for your soul to do that, right? And do that consistently throughout your life. We have a workbook coming out soon, the Super Story Workbook, and we actually have a process that you can do that. But whatever the process is, do that, and I think that'll make you a better, interesting person. So
yeah, and I appreciate Martin. I want to give Martin a strong shout out. It takes one or a webinar. No one wants to ask the first question.
Right.
So Martin is a pioneer, and I think he'll do well in life being a pioneer. I encourage all of you to start writing in. We'd love to hear from you, what your heartbeat is, what those questions are, and we can jam on it.
100%. One day, there's going to be a Jeopardy question. Who asked the first mailbag question on the Superstory podcast? And it'll be Martin Devin. And so
that's definitely a Jeopardy question.
That's it. So who is Martin Devin? So I appreciate it, guys.